Hello and welcome back to another episode of Radical Disruption. Today I am joined by Dr. Kelly Vincent, who is a licensed clinical psychologist and owner of Nourished Wellness Group, a holistic mental health group practice in Encinitas, California. She is passionate about the integration of the mind and body in clinical treatment, thus utilizing a variety of modalities such as EMDR, yoga therapy, walk-talk therapy, somatic experience, and nervous system education in her work with clients. She specializes in working with women who struggle with trauma, anxiety, depression, self-esteem, and imposter syndrome. She loves working with women of all ages, especially 20-somethings, female entrepreneurs, and mothers. Dr. Vincent is a certified gentle and restorative yoga teacher, author of True You, a self-discovery journal, and founder of Studio Nourished, a digital oasis to relearn, restore, release, and regulate. In today's episode, Kelly and I talk about experiencing high-functioning anxiety, imposter syndrome, and burnout as an entrepreneur. Let's dive in. Hello, I am so excited. I have Kelly here with me, and we were just chatting all things mom life before, and being a mom and an entrepreneur, and how it's this beautiful thing, but also sometimes this hectic thing, and how the two things work hand in hand. But I'm really excited to dive into our conversation today, all about mental health and taking care of yourself as an entrepreneur, which truthfully is not something that as entrepreneurs we do very well. We do a lot of things well as entrepreneurs, but oftentimes taking care of ourselves gets put on the back burner. So I'm really excited to chat with Kelly about all things taking care of ourselves today. That being said, though, before I dive in, Kelly, I would love for you to share what your entrepreneurship story is. How did you get to where you are today?
Yes, I love that. And yes, the wild ride, I think baby life and entrepreneur life, they just marry each other quite well
Yes.
as it relates to being wild. Yes, my journey. Okay, let me see how I can make sure we condense this. I actually used to be in marketing. So I was in digital marketing for probably almost 7 years. And then what I call a quarter life crisis and decided, okay, this doesn't align. This doesn't fit. I can't see myself here. And then just started to do a year-long exploration of different classes and just trying to figure out what it is that I freaking want to do, because who is supposed to know that at age 21 when you graduate typically from college? And it was just this idea of people and their stories and understanding why they were the way that they were. And of course, I was very curious about myself and my own family because, every family has its thing. And so that idea of becoming a psychologist, I don't even know why, just kept being pulled in that direction. But it was a complete 180, a complete Hail Mary. And thank goodness it's worked out, because I knew nothing about therapy. I don't even think I had gone to therapy, if I really think about it. And I was a marketing major and all the things. So I went that direction. I also saw that it had a lot of legs as it related to different paths that I could take as a psychologist. I was working, I think Sephora was my last job in their corporate. And I was just in my little cubicle. This was before work from home days where that was not a thing. And I was like, I just need freedom. I need flexibility, and I need to be able to tap into different parts of myself. So that was in the back of my mind. But then I just fell in love with this idea of supporting people, guiding people, helping people. To see them transform before your eyes is just very fulfilling. So went back to school, got my doctorate, and then actually, speaking of motherhood, decided to have a baby right after I got my doctorate. And then he was probably 7 months old, started my private practice, and then decided to start a co-working space, because why not have a baby, have a business, have a second business. And I did that for a while. And we're going to talk about high functioning anxiety in a second, but hello, high functioning anxiety. So I did that for a couple of years. And then in the last 2 years, I started a group practice. So now I have 4 employees that work alongside me. And then there's this whole other side of my business. I call it the Instagram side of my business, where it became a business and didn't intend for it to become a business, where just different opportunities have come in with Audible and Flow and all these different things, which have been so cool. So I look back on my younger self and I'm like, oh my goodness, like you had that gut intuition that this could be a career that really opens up doors to all these different opportunities. And it has turned out that way, but it's been a wild ride on all fronts. So I'm now still running all of those things at the same time. And then of course seeing one-on-one clients as well. So a
I
little bit
love
much.
that. I love that so much. And I love that our journeys are like pretty much complete opposites. Like for me, I was in the health space, and
Right.
dropped out of college to go into the marketing space. And for you, it was a little bit backwards, but I just love listening to other people's stories because there's always like that moment in their story where they're like, okay, things need to change. And then suddenly like, these doors just start opening.
Yeah.
And then you look back and you're like, wait, how did I even get here? And it was just like a series of all these like really cool and special like moments where you're
Mhm.
like, hey, I'm going to go down this path and it's going to lead me here. And anyways, I just love hearing that story. But something that you touched on was high functioning anxiety. So can you
Mhm.
explain what high functioning anxiety is and how specifically it manifests through us as entrepreneurs,
Yeah,
particularly those who are in the first few years of business, but
for sure.
truthfully at any time in the
Yeah.
entrepreneur journey.
Oh, it will pop up at any time. Yes. Depending on what you're doing. Yes. Just a clarification, high functioning anxiety is not a clinical term. It's definitely, so it's not found in the DSM, which is like the big old book that we utilize to help diagnose or help figure out what it is going on for our clients. It's a mainstream term that I feel like caught wind because so many people, especially women, resonated with this idea of high functioning anxiety. So they essentially, it's an individual who wouldn't meet criteria for a generalized anxiety disorder. Because one of the biggest criteria points is impairing your ability to function. That's in almost every single diagnosis. And normally with high functioning anxiety types, it's not impairing them, it's
Yeah.
actually like catapulting them. However, they're struggling on the inside. They're having a lot of overwhelm, a lot of nervous system dysregulation, a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry, but yet they're presenting as if put together and they are successful and they're very achievement oriented and they're personable. And so it's a very sort of you see on the outside and then what is going on in the inside. So they don't totally resonate with, well, I'm not seeing not my friend, things like that, but they're just still really struggling to feel grounded and to feel at peace and to feel at ease. So I fell in, I feel like, to this specialty, or maybe just the universe collided together in my own experience, because I would definitely consider myself one of those people that kind of classified myself as high functioning anxiety. And plus, I had anxiety that was there for a long time. But then you start to realize it's not sustainable, right? So I work with a lot of both moms, it's like a hybrid, moms and small business owners who are coming in and they're just struggling. They're feeling it and they're feeling the weight of it. And I think with entrepreneurship, especially in the first 2, 3 years, nobody knows what they're doing. Nobody has it figured out. It might look that way from the outside, but you are just trial and erroring everything and you are making massive mistakes and getting back up. And that's how you learn, right? That's the beauty of it, is that you're really just figuring it out as you go. But then there's other elements that create the anxiety as it relates to like comparison. Good old social media, lots of pros to social media, but then you're scrolling, you're seeing how great everyone's doing and 20,000 months and all these things, and you start to have that internal dialogue of, oh, it must be me, I'm not doing enough, right? So then the anxiety starts to increase, get loud, but again, you're still actively functioning, you're still
Yeah.
doing the things, you're still showing up, but you're just having a real hard time kind of balancing that internal experience with kind of what that external like output tends to look like. That's just a little snippet and an example as it relates to this population, but it's very common. I also want to say very common.
Yeah, it makes me think of like the type A perfectionist. Like I
Yes.
almost feel like that person could be categorized underneath
Yeah.
high functioning anxiety, and
Pointing
me,
to yourself.
me, that is me.
I kind of feel like entrepreneurship, I don't know. I feel like there's a flavor that like requires that type of personality type to get yourself going. But yes, they're all intertwined. Perfectionism is in there. The imposter syndrome stuff, if we get to that, is in there. Yes, it's all in
I
there.
love that. Okay, signs though. What are some signs? I know you said you're aiming to achieve and achieve. Can you give us some signs? And then now that we know if we're potentially categorized underneath this, like how can we get to the root of it
Yep.
to work through it and overcome this?
Yeah, the root is so important. And I'll get to that. Yeah. So, signs typically, if we think of anxiety, right? Generalized anxiety is excessive worry that you can't control. It's restlessness, it's irritability, it's the physical sensations, the racing heart or the chest pain, sweating. And that's all has to do with our autonomic nervous system, which could be a whole nother podcast in of itself to talk about the nervous system. But it's a lot of like physical agitation and then a lot of mental sort of rumination, spiraling, can't struggle to make decisions. So it presents very differently depending on the person. Like I'm a type where the anxiety is very physical. I like will feel it and not think I'm anxious at all. Or I'll look at my aura ring and be like, oh, I'm in the stress zone. Like I feel fine though. And my body's just habituated that way. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of us get into these, I don't know, habits where our nervous system is just more prone for that hyperactivation or what they call hyper arousal, where we're just on this like other level. Like you can't slow down would be another sign.
Yeah.
You struggle with rest. Someone's like, hey, you should meditate. And you're like, that is the most god awful thing I've ever heard. I never want to sit and meditate ever. Just this idea of stillness and rest just feels very foreign. You also could have some beliefs around rest, it not being productive and things like that. So that's a whole nother story. But it's a experience that of course, yes, comes up a little differently depending on the person, depending on the situation. But it's just this sense of feeling very ungrounded, feeling very unanchored, or not feeling like you can settle in and just be present and live life in a way that feels really aligned with who you are and your values. It's a big disconnect in a way. And then when it comes to the roots, yes, that is like my favorite part of my work, is trying to uncover and understand what is underneath there, because it's
Yeah.
not who you are. It's what you experience. It is not your identity. And so when we separate out this experience from our identity, we can see it as a separate thing. It's a separate part of us, essentially. And usually
Yeah.
that part is trying to protect us, right? Usually that part is showing up in this way to try to get its needs met, or to try to kind of fend off maybe a rooted belief system like, I'm not worthy unless I'm productive. I'm
Yeah.
not enough unless I'm super successful. I'm not going to be accepted or loved or heard or seen. Those core needs that we all have
Yeah.
tend to be underneath there. And then roots, I mean, we could, yeah, another whole podcast on that too, but it could be attachment styles that you have with caregivers. It could be wounding in your childhood and trauma. And it could just be modeling, right? Like you could have had caregivers that also moved through the world in this way. And also it can be very self-reinforcing, right? Because society can tell you, oh, good job, good job, good job, when you're achieving and doing all the things and never
Yeah.
stopping. You get a lot of gold stars, right? Good old hustle culture, which I feel like is a little bit on the way out. But that was definitely a thing, I feel like, for a long time. So it's a bit of a collection of potential things depending on the person. It's really about getting curious and trying to ask those questions of what is underneath this? Why is it that I'm moving through the world in this way? What is this rooted in, and what parts are showing up? So, yeah.
No, that's so good. And I'm sitting here listening. I'm like, I don't know if there's any entrepreneur out there that hasn't at least experienced this if they're not living this reality right now. Just everything where you're saying the constant go and attaching their worth to their success. And I've been there myself. That
Yeah.
was my whole first year in business. It was a journey. It was a struggle there for quite
Yeah.
some time of just a lot of it was unlearning a lot of the things that, and I don't even know where they necessarily even came from, but a lot of unlearning like techniques and like
Mhm.
different things where it's like, oh, I have to wake up at 5 a.m. to be successful. I have to work
Yeah.
12-hour days to be successful. And that was for me, like always going and going and going to like the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And what you said about rest and how you perceive rest. I think it's something that we hear a lot in the entrepreneurship space, but like actually sitting with yourself and being like, how do I feel about rest? Most entrepreneurs that I know,
Yep.
they don't rest. They don't rest. And so that was a huge thing for me too, of like being able to sit down with my husband and watch a Netflix show at the end of the day for quite like for that first year. I was like, I had to be on my phone working
Yeah.
while I was doing that. Like I couldn't just go for a walk. I had to be listening to a podcast. I couldn't just go do like I had to be something that was attached to
Yeah.
me moving forward in my business and achieving. So I resonate so deeply with that.
Yeah.
And something else that I was thinking about with being a new entrepreneur or just at any point in your entrepreneurship journey as well is imposter syndrome. And this is such a common thing that comes up. And I also think too that sometimes with imposter syndrome, you almost like compensate, and that could probably, and you can speak to this way better than I can, but does that also sometimes lead to the high functioning anxiety?
100%. Yeah. And I also see, I think of, okay, anxiety as the bigger umbrella, and underneath anxiety are these different specific experiences with it. So imposter syndrome, in the way that I view it and conceptualize, is that's like a version of a type of anxiety. High
Mm,
functioning anxiety is like a type of anxiety, just like panic disorder or panic attacks or whatever. It's a version of it. It's a more of extreme version. So it's all this general fear and general worry. And underneath it's just very specific reasons as to why that fear is getting loud. So with imposter syndrome, it's this like deep fear of I will be found out that I am a fraud, or I do not belong here, or what do I think I'm doing, right? It's just this very loud voice and part of us that just is really scared about being in this space or being vulnerable in this space because it's freaking new, most likely. And even when it's not new, like I still to this day have been doing this for a while and in these different spaces like podcasts, and there's certain things that like light up my nervous system. And I'm like, I am a fraud. You need to go sit down now because who do you think you are? And it's just that fear of what it's going to be like to be vulnerable and to potentially fail or say something stupid or whatever it may be. So, yes, they're all connected, in my opinion, or at least most of my clients, when we start to map it out, they are all very much connected. But yes, what you said at the very end, the imposter syndrome can definitely drive the high functioning anxiety behaviors because you're just going to, okay, then I got to work faster. I got to work harder. And it's actually really interesting. So if you're interested in imposter syndrome, anyone listening, Valerie Young is a author. She's actually a researcher, but she wrote a book on imposter syndrome and it's super helpful, super digestible in very layman's terms. But she talks about these 5 types of imposter syndrome. And it's all around this idea of how you perceive how you are competent or how you can be successful. And so these versions of imposter syndrome but it's like the perfectionist, right? If it's perfect, then I'm competent. Then I'm
Yeah.
going to be successful. And then there's like the genius, right? Like that you have to know everything. So I need to take all the classes before I can open my business or before I put myself out there. Then I'll
Yeah.
be competent or perceived competent. Then there's like the soloist, like I have to do it on my own kind of thing, which means I'm competent if I'm able to do it on my own. There's the I think she says the superwoman or superhuman or something where I have to be able to do it all and be able to juggle it all to be confident. And then the 5th one, I can't remember. It's either like expert or natural genius, something like that. Either one that you have to do it in a certain amount of time. Like I should be able to do this quickly or know how to do it to be competent. So it's really interesting. And there's so much more information that I actually have a download on my site that gives like the breakdown of them all. But that can be really helpful to understand like how you view competency and how you view success as it relates to this experience of imposter syndrome, because they tend to be tied.
That was wow. That was that. I wish that I had that way earlier in my entrepreneurship journey because I can definitely pick out from those 5. But there was like 2 of them where I was like, yeah, that was definitely me for sure.
Yeah.
Now, what happens when you recognize that though? Because
Yeah.
obviously awareness is a huge thing. That's so
Mhm.
important. Just being aware that there is imposter syndrome there, that you are experiencing the things that you're experiencing. But what can you do once you realize that you're experiencing imposter syndrome? What are
Yeah.
some exercises? I don't know. What can you
For
do
sure.
about it?
Yeah, so many things. And I think like the awareness honestly is half the battle, and you being curious about your experience and about what you are experiencing is again half the battle, right? Because once you are aware of it, you can make intentional changes to shift and not spiral into the same, what I call the neural pathway that's very well defined. So I think like when I started to learn about this too, I was like, okay, yeah, because I was more what was it, the natural genius, where I felt like I had to just know everything. I just have
Yeah.
to know how to run a group practice before I start one. And it's no, nobody knows. Just go jump in and swim. You'll figure
Yeah.
it out kind of thing. But I think, yes, awareness, getting curious about different behaviors and tendencies that are popping up and linking them back. Hey, is this tied to the fact that I feel like a fraud or tied to the fact that I feel like I'm not enough or whatever it may be? And you got to just get really educated on your particular history and your particular experience and what could be tied to that. So the roots, I think, is a big deal. And then also, I think it sounds so cliche and so therapist of me, but it's so also about how you're speaking to yourself, right? The level of compassion, that part of you, and cultivating that compassionate part of you to be like, hey, it's almost like your inner cheerleader to come in and say, whoa, hold the phone. You're doing okay. Like
Yeah.
things are okay. You're learning, you're growing. It's just as if how you would talk to somebody like your best friend or a 5-year-old that's really struggling. It's inviting in that kind of voice to help balance out the fear, right? Because it's usually a part of you that's just really scared that you're not going to succeed or that you're going to fail or you're not going to prove yourself or whatever it may be. And so meeting that part with the compassionate part and having a little internal dialogue, just a little chat with yourself, and we all talk to ourselves, but this is a more intentional chat can be really helpful, because that also helps soothe and regulate the nervous system. Because when that anxiety part, fear part, imposter part, whatever you want to call it, is really loud, your nervous system is in fight, flight, or maybe freeze, right? It's just in a very dysregulated state because it's very overwhelmed. But if we're bringing in these compassionate parts to just normalize it for ourselves, like overly normalize would be another thing I would suggest, is to be able to help calm and soothe, being like, all right, let's just think about this another way. Let's take that 10,000 foot view, because that's not exactly what's happening here. So there's that off the top of my head. And there's so many things. Regulating your nervous system too is a huge one. Understanding what's happening from the inside out is a huge one, because then you're less reactionary. But again, that would be a whole nother podcast to talk about that.
Yeah. Sounds like we just need to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, we'll just keep coming back and talk about
and maybe part 3 after that too. Something that you were saying, I have a question about imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I think that with imposter syndrome, people experience it one time and then they like overcome it and they're like, okay, that's great. And then it comes back up and they're like, why is this coming back up again? And then they like work through it and then it comes back up. I think it's one of those things, at least in my opinion, that never quite ever goes away. I think that you learn how to work through it faster. But something that I have coached my students on, which I am not an expert in imposter syndrome, but just speaking from my own experience experiencing imposter syndrome, is the imposter syndrome. Like if I were to say, for example, I'm experiencing imposter syndrome with showing up on social media.
Yeah.
I probably experienced that. I did experience that at the very beginning of my journey, but the imposter syndrome that I feel today about showing up on social media is going to be a different level, a different version. Can you speak to that a little bit more if you have any thoughts on that?
No, 100%. And no, that is also very normal. That is going to show up at different times for different reasons. And the biggest reason is that it's unfamiliar. It's something new. The brain likes familiar. The brain likes to know what's going to happen. The brain essentially wants to keep you safe. The nervous system and the brain want to keep you safe. That is its job. And so if you're just diving into something super new, most likely that is going to induce fear. And the fear then is like, nope, I'm not doing this. Like, peace out. Like, we can't do this. Oh my gosh, freak out mode. And so I think of it as like imposter syndrome, and it really just being fear. It's a fear part. Something feels really scary. So of course, as you grow in your entrepreneurial journey, you are going to dip your toe or dive right into areas that are completely new. I think, aren't you doing like a summit, right? Like you're doing an
in-person event. Holy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So new, right? Like probably planning it is super new to you. And maybe going up there and being the speaker, the host is super new.
Yeah.
So again, of course, imposter syndrome is going to come up. And really, let's just interchange it with fear. It might, and I'm not saying that you're fearful about it. I'm sure you're super stoked and ready.
I am fearful about it. Yeah, we can expose that. Go for it.
Which is natural, right? And I also think that the fear means that you care. That it's something that you value and you want it to go well and you want it to be an amazing thing for the people that are going to attend there, right? So we can reframe that fear as also just something that's very meaningful. But of course, the imposter syndrome is going to come up because you've never done it, right? And that would also align with how our brain and our nervous system perceive things as well, where it's going to have a little bit of hesitation. So I almost say to a lot of my clients too, just expect it. And almost welcome it in. Say, I know you're going to be there. Come on down. Let's have a conversation. And again, it's that conversation between that part. It's okay, my authentic, sort of grounded, rational part is going to chat with this part, imposter syndrome, fear, whatever you want to call it. And let's just hear you out. Like, I'll give you the microphone. What do you got to say? What are you most scared of? And usually it's wild. When you do just slow down and do a little bit of that like dialogue, you start to realize like, oh, that's why. Or, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to trip and I'm just really scared I'm going to fumble my words or whatever it may be. And then it can help you lead to, again, intentional shifts. Okay, what would make me feel really much more prepared? Or how could I prepare in a way that will make me feel like I've done everything I can at that point? So I think it can get us back into a more grounded state of thinking. Because if you think about it, when our nervous system is activated in flight or freeze, this front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, goes offline. And that's our thinking, our planning, our logic, our rationale, all the things, because it's just focused on the threat. Like it's all it's focusing on is protecting us from the threat. So when we get ourselves a little bit more grounded, and I think that dialogue between the parts can help us get grounded because we see it less as a threat. We see it more as just a part of us. then we can think through, okay, what would be a good action item here? What would be helpful to me? So yes, super normal. I still experience imposter syndrome and I'm supposed to be an expert on it, right? So there's that. Because we're human and we're complex and we have big emotions, and it's just about tending to those emotions and letting them be there versus just trying to get rid.
Yeah, I love what you said around changing it of I'm feeling this feeling because I care.
Yeah.
I actually just had one of my one-on-one coaching clients on Monday. She had over the weekend a six-figure sale, and it
Nice.
was like amazing. And she came to me and she's like, I'm celebrating the heck out of this, but also there's this imposter syndrome of these people are inside this offer. What if they don't have a good experience? And this is an offer that she's been selling for years and has like hundreds of people inside. And she also had imposter syndrome too about what if I can't ever make a sale again? You know, just like what if people are never going to want to purchase from me again? And something that I actually reflected back to her was you're worried because you care, because you want to reach more people and increase your impact and get more people inside this offer and, you know, help them at the highest level. And I just love that reframe of like, I feel this way because I care, because that is such a way more grounding than like fear. I'm like, oh, this is up here, but I care. It's, oh, I don't know. To me, that feels a lot more grounding. So I just love that you
Yeah.
brought that up. Something else? Do you have something you want to add to
No,
that?
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say something else too that I want to talk on the in topic of grounding is
Mhm.
rest. Rest. Our
Mhm.
best friend is
Mhm.
entrepreneurs. Rest and recovery are often overlooked in the hustle of entrepreneurship, whether or not you're like in the hustle culture or not, like
Yeah.
it just happens.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, you get caught up in it. Can you talk about the critical role of restorative rest and how it can
Yes.
impact productivity and business success?
Yes, and I've been learning this for quite some time now, and I'm still trying to practice what I preach, and I'm also trying to eradicate beliefs around rest that got instilled in me a long time ago. And what I want to say too, especially for the people listening who are like, "Oh, I can't rest. I got to do the thing." Maybe think of it this way. There are going to be periods of times where fine, you put your head down and you are grinding and you are doing the thing and you need that and your business requires that and maybe your family requires that. There are times where it's not necessarily a bad thing, but if we're never coming up for air, we all know we are all very intelligent human beings. We know that is not going to be sustainable. It's like not putting gas in a car and you're trying to drive cross country. Like you're not going to get very far. Like your body will begin to scream at you in some way, shape, or form, or mentally, right? Or your emotions will begin to scream at you at some point. And what's wild about it is that if you think about it, again, we all know this, but we just put it in the back of our mind. When we get that restorative rest, we are way more productive. We're way more creative. We're way more focused. Same thing with like sleep, right? When we get a really good restorative night's sleep, it sets us up for that next day or even for that week, right? It could be so impactful. And we know that as it relates to our systems and all the things. So I think the way that I teach with my clients and just even myself is that if I'm intentional throughout my day of just being aware of where I'm at, especially within my nervous system, and
Mhm.
I'm intentionally creating space for a little bit of restorative rest, then I feel like I'm doing a good job. And restorative rest doesn't mean like you go take a nap and you're like out for 2 hours. No, restorative rest could be like yesterday, this just happened. I was pounding away on my computer. I was getting excited about something. I think it was something that you had sent, something about the automation stuff. I think it was like literally in something that you had taught that because I was in your automation thing. Anyways, and I noticed myself, I noticed my physical posture. I was like, and again, I wasn't like stressed mentally, but I could feel my body. I could feel my eyes were strained. Essentially, I needed a restorative moment. I needed a
Mhm.
moment to step away from my computer. And I went outside. I walked around the block for a few times. It was sunny at that point, which was beautiful. So felt the sunshine. And in just that moment, when I came back down to sit at my desk, I was just way more regulated, which helped me be way more efficient at what
Mhm.
it is that I was doing versus going off of that hyper aroused energy that, yes, it can be frantic and you can get a lot done. but it's frantic and it really
Yeah.
wears and tears on your body. So I think the restorative rest can be even just very small. It doesn't have to be this big old thing like a restorative yoga class, which is beautiful. That can be very helpful too. But understanding your body and your body's cues, the Aura Ring, I feel like has been such a game changer because it has a whole stress map. It's actually very scary sometimes when you look at your stress map for the day. I'm like, oh my God. But I'll check that and I'll be like, where am I at? Where have I been? And if my stress to restorative is totally lopsided, then I'm like, oh, okay, I need to shift my day. I need to shift how I want to move through the rest of the day, even if it's like taking an intentional breath, like literally just breathing can be so impactful. And our breath is tied to our nervous system, right? Very short, shallow breath can activate the sympathetic, which is the fight flight, and then very slow, lengthen exhale types of breathing can activate the parasympathetic, which is that rest and digest part of our nervous system. So even if you're just freaking breathing, great, good, you're doing good in life, right? So again, I think the restorative rest, I think, and especially rest in general, I think we all get a little, I don't have time, but you do have time to take a slow breath for 2 minutes, or you do have time to maybe just go walk outside and stick your face in the sunshine. We just got to make the time.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that. Something that I implemented, I think it was like a year and a half into my business, is what I call my creative space, which is
Yeah,
basically just time for rest. It's time for me to do anything. I could read a book, I could go for a walk, I could go play pickleball, like whatever.
love it.
It's my creative space because what I realized in my business is I'm actually less creative when I'm in my business 24/7. And
Mm-hmm.
it was getting to the point where I was like, I don't have any ideas. I don't know. I'm not being efficient. I'm not being productive. Nothing was getting done. And when I live my life, I'm actually a better entrepreneur
Yes.
because of it. And I think that for me, like the word rest was almost like triggering for a while because when I think of rest, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna like you said, go sit and meditate. But I also had to realize that rest for me isn't necessarily, obviously, sometimes I might actually need a nap, especially
Yeah.
lately where I'm not sleeping.
Totally. Yeah.
But rest for me is more like just space and space for my head to breathe, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
away from like my business and all these ideas that I have. And I just again have realized that my best self in my business comes when I'm living my life. And that's
100%.
how that's me filling my cup. Like I have to fill my cup before I can go fill my communities, my students' cups, my clients' cups. And
Mm-hmm.
that comes from me taking time for myself at the end of the day.
100%. Yep. And there's different versions of rest, right? There's spiritual rest or social. There's all these different like versions of what rest looks like. And I think what you're tapping into is so important because there's also an element of play, right?
Mhm.
Like being able pickleball, you said, or playing with your daughter or whatever it may be. But that can help, again, regulate our nervous system in such a different way, helps us co-regulate, helps us come to a point where we see things more clearly or more creative than not. Nothing's coming in. We are
Yeah.
just in survival mode. So I think a big part of what I teach is again just trying to understand your own, somatic experience and what goes on mentally and emotionally and trying to integrate things that help support, like truly support at a very again restorative level that are going to help serve you in whatever it is that you're doing. Because yeah, entrepreneurship, talk about long haul, right? It's a beautiful thing and it's so many cool opportunities and a lot of flexibility and freedom and all that stuff. But it is just, you could always be doing something.
Yeah.
Always. So it's just, yeah, you could always do something for sure. But again, like I said before, your body will let you know and will pretty much intervene. Yeah, shut you down is probably a better way to put it because it can't withstand that level of energy and effort and exertion. So,
Yeah. Something that I would love to dive a little bit deeper into is the people's entrepreneurs' drive for success. And I think that when it comes to mental health and the reason why people are like, oh, let me just put this on the shelf, or oh, this doesn't apply to me, or oh, I don't need this right now, which is not the case. We all need it right now.
yeah.
I think that the reason why is because of the word balance. And they're like, how do I balance like high success in these huge goals that I have, like multiple 5-figure months and 6-figure, 7-figure years? Like, how can I balance that type of high success with mental health? And I don't love the word balance, but
Yeah.
for whatever reason, I haven't ever on my entrepreneurship journey been able to find a better word than balance. But What do you have to say about
Yeah.
that?
The first thing I'll say is I do not like balance because it doesn't exist. Like
Yeah,
you literally cannot be 100% mom, 100% business owner, 100% wife all at the same time. Like it
yeah.
truly just doesn't exist. I always shift towards priorities and prioritization. What are you prioritizing today that needs to be your focus and your attention? And I think, yes, some priorities start to bash together or smash together, and it gets a little hairy there sometimes. But you can always be very intentional about
Yeah,
how you set your day. And I think certain structured activities or structured things that you can do for yourself at the start of your day and at the end of your day can be so, so helpful when you
mm,
are that person that's juggling a zillion million things, right? So if it's, I do the 5 minute journal. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's,
yeah,
yeah, I love it. And it gets me a little bit more grounded, gets me more in tune as it relates to my mindset. But then I also jot out what are my 3 priorities for the day.
yeah,
And I usually have these buckets, right? There's the family bucket. There's obviously the group practice bucket. I'm not going to list all my buckets, but I have these like buckets that you can map out for yourself of what are your biggest priorities that you always intentionally want to tend to or try to intentionally tend to most days, if not all days. But what has to come first and why is where you're just intentionally focusing each and every day and prioritizing that way. Because there could be a piece where you notice, say, like social, like friends, that's pushed down at the far end and it's not getting any love, but that you haven't prioritized it. So it's okay. I'm going to intentionally make that a priority for today because
yeah.
everything else has gone by the wayside. So again, the balance, yeah, there's, yeah. It just doesn't exist. It's just about, and I think the other piece around this, so prioritization is a big one for me. And then getting really grounded and rooted at the start of your day and the end of your day is a big one for me. But then also values. What the heck do you value,
Yeah.
right? And why do you value it? So sometimes the priority buckets are part of your values, like family or whatever, successful business. But there's more to it than that. There's some granular like values that you can do some work around. So, like for instance, connection is something I value heavily, like
Yeah.
feeling really connected to the people I love and the people around me, or connected to even my business. So I will take that value and try to attach an action to it. And that becomes a little bit of that like prioritization of what needs to happen when. But let's be real, there's no perfect science. It, to me, it just seems like a work in progress all day, every day, right? And things change, right? You bring in a baby into the world and whoop, world upside down. Every priority is totally different. So, and that's going to happen throughout the rest of our lives. So I think it's just about being open and curious and flexible to how to support yourself in these different phases of life, seasons of life, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's my immediate answer.
No, yeah, I love that so much. My last question that I would love to hit on is burnout.
Yeah.
Now, as business owners, we're in it for the long game. Whether you want to, I shouldn't say everyone is in it for the long game. If you are in it for the long game, then you want to avoid burnout because that's going to derail you there. If you want high success, 6-figure, 7-figure years that a lot of entrepreneurs are shooting for and totally attainable for anyone, you have to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And in order to do one of the biggest things is burnout. And it's not talked about anywhere near enough. And I think I've just been seeing, I don't know if I would call it a trend, but there have been a lot of big names in the entrepreneurship space who are taking a step back, who have temporarily shut down their businesses or permanently shut down their businesses. And I don't know exactly why that
Yeah.
has, I can't say. I haven't had a one on one conversation with
Mhm.
them, but I would assume it's around the terms of burnout and experiencing burnout. And I just think that it is a huge conversation that, again, is just not happening anywhere near enough. And I would love to hear your thoughts
Yeah.
on like sustainable work habits and routines to ensure long-term success in our businesses without burnout.
Yeah, it's such a good question. Then usually burnout then leads to the other emotional experiences like anxiety of, oh, I'm never going to make it. I'm never going to be successful, all the things. I think with burnout, it's one of those things where we just have to get really honest with ourselves. And we usually have to make tough decisions based off of that honesty. I literally just had this conversation with my husband like a week ago around Instagram and content creation and being on there. And I've been on there for how many years? And I always have to come back to my why. Like, why am I here?
Yeah.
What is my intention? What is my purpose? All the things. But I'm totally burnt out. Like, I'm totally burnt out of the constant machine that just needs, it's like my children. They just constantly need things. But I think it's about getting honest with myself that I'm feeling that and that something needs to shift for now, right? And it doesn't have to be forever, but it needs to be a temporary decision that I make to take a step back and get the intentional restorative rest that I need in order to come back in a way that feels really, I don't know, ready to take that next step or whatever it is that I'm planning to do. But I think with burnout, it's really, you have to acknowledge what you're feeling and then acknowledge what decision you might need to make that might be hard for temporary time, right? Like for whatever it is, so that you can be able to get to a place where you feel way more connected to yourself, connected to your business, connected to your why. And really, I just see so much of my clients too. They just need space. They just need literal, figurative, all the which ways, right? Like they just need capacity and space to get recalibrated to then jump back in there because it is a long haul, right? It truly is. And some
Yeah.
people do want to tap out, right? And that's okay too. But I think that recalibration and that rest is going to look different for everybody. But you got to be honest with yourself and you got to make some tough choices.
Yeah. My question to you, if let's say this is the scenario where
Mm-hmm.
someone is, okay, I am posting 7 times a week on Instagram and I'm feeling burnt out, but in order for me to hit my goal, I
Yeah.
have to be posting 7 times per
Yeah.
week. What do you say to that person where it's you're looking at your goal and the actions that you have to take to be able to get to that goal it's not
Yep.
sustainable.
Yep. That's where the tough choices of making a decision in your business at that moment to pick yourself are critical, meaning like maybe you need to outsource. Maybe you need someone to come in and help you. Maybe you don't post 7 times and you just get a little bit more strategic about what you are putting out there and how much you're putting out there. I've my this one friend of mine, she's like, why don't you have anyone do your Instagram? I'm like, because this feels like it's my voice and it's my brain. Like I just can't. It's something that I feel like for so long I couldn't let go of, but I've slowly now I have somebody post for me, which has made a huge difference. Like I still make the content, but they post for me. And that has made a huge difference on my energy and all the things. So I think it's asking yourself those tough questions again of, okay, like I might need to do something here to serve my best interests and my
Yeah.
long-term interest of being connected to this bigger goal. But it's hard. It's not easy. It's very hard to make these decisions. But yeah, you have to make decisions constantly in business. So this is just another one of those decisions that might feel a little bit weightier because usually in just a little, this is again, maybe a whole nother podcast, but usually it's tied to some sort of belief. If I don't show up seven
Yep.
times a week, I won't be successful. Or
Yep.
if I don't show up in this way, they won't think I'm worthy or whatever it is. It's usually some belief about you and what you've learned and what you've grown up with. So there's
Yeah.
also that work that you can do to uncover what is it that you're holding on to and why, right? What is it that it's fueling and providing you that can be really enlightening? Because then you can work with the belief, which is usually the root, right?
Yeah.
So I know for me, and just quickly, I'm not going to go into a whole dear diary of my life, but a big sort of belief was getting over this idea of enoughness, right? So I was chasing after this feeling of being enough, and I'll do this to be enough. I'll do that to be enough. And
Yeah.
then once I finally figured it out and understood why I did the things that I did and why I was achieving in the way that I was, it was like, oh man, I got to soothe that. Like I got to heal that deeper layered root that is tied to a lot of different things. Because this whole like me doing this next venture is not the problem. It's like how I'm viewing it and how I'm attacking it is really
Yeah.
what the problem is. There's always a root.
I love that. And I think that awareness as an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
it's the biggest thing because once you're aware of it, then you have the ability to get to the root of it. And that is what is ultimately going to
Yes.
solve that. And so I think that, and I think a lot of times too, it's like, oh, I'm feeling burnt out. That sucks. But that's actually, it's not good that you're feeling burnt out, but you recognize that you're starting to feel that.
Right.
And usually at that point, not all the time, but usually at that point, you're not quite to the like full point of burnout. And so it's good that like you're recognizing it then because you can
Yes.
stop it before you get to the point where it does completely shut you down in every aspect of your business. So
Really.
I think that that's so important. My last question for you, and maybe there's not an answer to this. We talked about high functioning anxiety. We talked about imposter syndrome. We talked about burnout. I would love to know. I'm sure there's somehow all these things have got to be correlated and
Yes.
integrated and all of that. Can you talk a little bit more about all of that?
Yeah. It's a big question, but yes, they kind of all play off each other, right? So if you're identify with high function anxiety and you're doing your thing, you're going, and there's just a lot of internal like distress, but you're not really paying attention, that's going to lead to burnout, right? Or if the imposter syndrome is loud, saying you're a fraud, sit down, you shouldn't be doing this, that's going to create a lot of anxiety, right? So then the high function anxiety goes crazy. So they all play off each other and almost exasperate one another. And I
Yeah.
think the burnout, in my opinion, is really that like last line of defense of
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore, right? All the other things have been so loud and so daunting and so exhausting. And I also think we haven't even talked about the physical exhaustion that this all takes and the toll
Yeah.
it takes on your body to be in this stress zone for more days than not. That's going to lead to burnout regardless, right? Because the body, again, will let you know. So yeah, they all play off each other. They're all integrated. And I think like something that someone can do, and you don't have to go to therapy for this, but it could be really great. I know I'm biased, but is to take a step back and just understand all the parts at play. What
Yeah.
are all the parts that are coming up for you, and what are they tied to? What would they maybe saying if, again, gave them the microphone? What is the burnout saying? It might just be like, sit down, take a
Yeah.
nap, rest. You don't need to do it, right? So it usually there's again a reason, and sometimes this all can be wrapped up in just a coping, how we learned how to cope with stressful things or how we learned how to cope in general. And they're like high functioning anxiety and like perfectionism. We learned to cope in that way because then we got our needs met, right? So
Yeah.
being able to take a step back and just see, okay, what is going on? Like, where am I at and what is happening and what's coming up for me? I mean, just as that simple kind of pause can make a big difference. I think just pausing in general, slowing things down in general can make a huge difference. And I know we don't want to. I think I told you before we started recording, it's like binging your content and like my little shiny object syndrome, just ping, ping of all the cool things that you're talking about and that you can implement. But taking a breath, I mean, like, does that need to happen now?
Yeah.
No. Can I add this to my wish list? Yes. Like it, so it's organization too, I think is really key with all of this, trying to get really organized about your priorities and about
Yeah.
your kind of game plan.
Oh, that was so good. I know that's a loaded question, but for me, like we talked about all these things. I'm like, you know that they're somehow connected, so that helps me to really see the big picture. So I appreciate you
Yes.
walking through that. My final question is going back to you and your journey. If you could go
Mhm.
back to day one of your journey and give yourself any one piece of advice, what would it be?
I had two things. I would give her a big ol' hug. I would just give her a hug because the level of intensity that she was holding in her mind and her body, she just needed a freaking hug. And I think the other piece of advice I would just that's like slow
Yeah.
down. Slow down so you can get a clear understanding of what you're trying to actually do and why you're trying to do it, right? Like having a little bit of a clearer roadmap. I think the early days I was, and my poor husband, but I was just shoot from the hip and I was just like, no, this sounds cool, follow it. And I'm just like very highly productive. If
Yeah.
you give me a task, I will just execute. And even my husband's like, I don't understand how you produce the amount that you do. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think if I were to slow down and figure out that bigger why much earlier, it would have then guided me, a little bit more, smoothly. However, then I think like you learn,
Yeah.
a lot of the things that I know now, I wouldn't have known if I didn't go that route. So, but I do think slowing down and continuing to connect with yourself and, recalibrating, get regulated and understanding a little bit of the why, it can be helpful regardless. But I like that question. I'm going to keep thinking about it. I should ask my clients that because it's helpful.
I love that. No, slow down. That's the message that I need to hear. And this season of life has taught me that. Whether I wanted to learn it or not, it has taught me.
Your kid,
Beautiful.
your kid will teach you that for sure, which is like such a gift, right? Because they're just
Yes.
doing their thing and
Yeah,
just absorbing the world. It's the greatest teacher.
it is for sure. Okay. You're amazing. Where can people connect with you further? And what, if they want to dive deeper into all the things that you teach, how can they do so?
Yeah. So I would say, so go to drkellyvincent.com/Instagram and a bunch of my free downloads are on. There's an imposter syndrome one, a high functioning anxiety one, and then a bunch of like supportive like practices for anxiety and nervous system. So that might be a good place.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. You're amazing.
Thank you for having me.